Like we are live here, so welcome back to We Play Games. I'm Walker. Here we are with Humankind, and we are about to probably do one of the weirdest streams I think I've done on the channel probably ever. We are gonna do a stream where we're gonna talk about Humankind, and we're gonna play some Humankind, but we're gonna do more than that. We are going to go ahead and try to turn the audio up here actually, because I can't miss out on this music. It's just way too good. But what we're going to be really doing here is we're going to kick this off. This is going to be only one page of notes, so I'm not going to waste anybody's time by like making us read a 60-page document, but we are going to actually do like a little bit of history here, so that way we can talk about like the depictions of history as a narrative device in video games. I think that's really important for Humankind, because this is a game by Amplitude Studios. For people who have not played games in the Amplitude library, Amplitude leans a lot on narrative in their games, and I think they do so in a way that like works really well, because they are not only like present in the game's narrative, like with pop-ups and events and stuff, they're present in the game's mechanics. This is something that's like really important to me whenever it comes to 4X game design. Like for those of you who know your 4X history, Master of Orion 2 is a post-apocalyptic game. It takes place after the galactic community collapses in after Master of Orion 1, and then there's this post-apocalypse, and people are sent back to being very agricultural, with people locked into essentially perpetual serfdom and subsistence farming, and essentially just trying to stay alive in that brutal post-apocalyptic world of Master of Orion 2. And I think that that's present in the mechanics of the game itself, even though there aren't a bunch of pop-ups reminding you that, you know, you have 60% of your population locked in as farmers at the beginning of the game with the Illyrians or whatever, and you have to waste all your time with all your pops doing nothing except feeding themselves. But like, that's a narrative too, and that's the way that mechanics work typically in most Amplitude games. But I do think that Humankind has some problems that, now that we've played on VIP, it kind of makes it difficult for me to enjoy vanilla. So we're gonna definitely commit to doing ancient and maybe medieval with the VIP Let's Plays. But I don't know if I'm gonna play more than that on vanilla, because one of the other problems that I encountered when I was like trying to do the tier lists like 2 years ago or whatever, is that like I just wasn't getting feedback from the game. I wasn't getting feedback from the AI. Like, they weren't pressuring me in terms of the picks that I was taking towards the end of the game, so like I didn't know what was good or not, because the AI wasn't really like arguing with me or doing what I think the game should be doing, which is creating a historical narrative. So in order for us to do that, we do have to take a step back and just talk about like depictions of history in video games. So for now, we do have like everything set up where hopefully you guys are able to see my Steam page. This is not as an effort of like, Walker, go outside and touch some grass, but I've played a lot of historical games, like Crusader Kings 2. This is not my full playtime. This is my full playtime on Steam. But for people who know CK2, like I got this on the old thing that was owned by Paradox Interactive. I think it was Gamergate, or Gamersgate. I don't remember which one it was. It was not the offensive one. It was just the unfortunate one that had the same name. But I probably have like 3,000 hours, including like before Steam, and I have like 1,500 on CK3, and like another 1,600 on EU4, and like 1,100 or something on Victoria 3, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg. Like a lot of games that are present in the modern, milieu of historical games have a very particular flavor and direction to them because they're made by Paradox Interactive. But not everyone makes, not all of them are made by Paradox Interactive. Like Civilization, I don't have any of my hours in Steam because I haven't played that game in like forever on Steam, but I probably have like another 2,000 or 3,000 hours in Civ 4, probably closer to 3, honestly. And that's a representation of something that's a little closer to what we're going to be seeing here in Humankind, honestly. Because Paradox Interactive games, they have a very particular flavor to them, and it's the distinction between history and historiography. I think that Victoria 3 is sort of like the best emblematic present of this when it comes to video game development. So Victoria 3, for people who do not know it, it has received some criticism from some people as being like Marxist or whatever, but it's because the mechanics of Victoria 3 are based in what is like a dialectical materialist thought process about history. But that isn't really how history operates. History, if you take it as an academic pursuit, oh yeah, exactly, Mystic Veil of Wingspan, I love those games. We may end up doing those as a like a special stream sometime, we'll see. But Victoria 3 is a special game to me. I think it's a really interesting game. It tells you a lot about a very particular lens when it comes to viewing and thinking about history, but history doesn't really work in terms of pure narrative lenses. So if you are ready for probably the most bizarre part of this stream, it is about to kick off here. But we're going to talk about like real history as an academic pursuit for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. If you, after the fact, are watching this video and want to correct me, please feel free to. Like, I was a history major like 12 years ago before I dropped out to major in like smoking weed and playing video games. So I'm not here to present myself as an expert, but like I've done a lot of academic work on history a long time ago, and so I understand the basics of it. And understanding those basics, I think, are exactly what should inform a good experience when playing an air quotes historical 4X. So we're gonna put on the Humankind soundtrack in the background here, so it's not just like me talking in silence forever, and hopefully it should be coming through, right, Bruno? I did test this beforehand, but basically, when it comes to the way history works as an academic pursuit, you need to understand first what a primary source document is. So I think this one, they were talking about primary source documents on like page 1991. This is another good representation of a primary source document though. So real history, when it comes down to it, is almost a scientific pursuit. It's something where you do not actually have a thesis beforehand for how things operated, but rather you do your best to find as many different pieces of information about the thing that you are interested in researching as humanly possible, even especially, in fact, contradictory pieces of information. That is really powerful when it comes to doing, real historical assessment, because as you see more and more data, and as you collect things like here, archaeology is just a very easy foundational representation of a primary source document. If you find bones of an ancient human, and you're able to conduct appropriate science on that ancient human to determine what its dietary income was like, you can start to, refer back from that. You can infer from it what their behaviors were like, right? If people are getting less of their caloric intake from the sea, like, which is what this section of this book is about, if people are getting less marine and non-marine, like aquatic things, then they're going to have different amounts of carbon and nitrogen in their bones. And that's really what history is kind of about. Like, the other forms of primary source documents that are really important are things like, there's Makiko's diary is just a great source if you care at all about, like, late Meiji Japan and you haven't read this, then you probably should. But this is another really important primary source document. It's as it says here, it's a spirited first-hand account of a domestic world of a housewife, and that's exactly what it is. But that's another way that you can learn how humans behaved. But the thing is that when it comes to history, unless you were like there in that time frame, you kind of have to infer a lot of things, and the more research that you do, and the more primary source documents that you have, and then the more secondary source documents that you have, which are, people analyzing the primary source documents or responding to them, or the historiography of the time place that all of these events were taking these events were taking place in, because people write about their own history, right? Even 2,200 years ago, you have the records of the Grand Historian, or I guess those probably more like 2,000 years ago records, but like people have been writing about their own history for almost as long as people have been participating in it. And that's a really valuable source of information too. But when it comes to the secondary sources that we find from ancient history, I would implore you to read them critically, because you will, of course, immediately realize that secondary writers are just the same as they are today. They have their own biases, and so you'll have, like, there's a really fun secondary source we read that was sort of presented as a primary source too, of a critic of Justinian who was talking about his invasion of North Africa and how it was like killing 10 billion people and like just hilariously ridiculous nonsense. So that's kind of like where you have to behave as a historian. You have to be constantly critical of the things that you're reading and interacting with. Look for, connections between things, because this is something that we will see when we start talking about the actually important parts of this document. But you'll see that history is a really weird thing, where if you don't make any connections at all, then all the research that you're doing is kind of meaningless. But if you overemphasize them, then you end up in sort of a narrative trap where you're looking for evidence to support your theory rather than looking at the evidence to create a theory. So the first part of this that I think we do need to talk about here is here in the introduction. You can read the foreword if you're bored. I think it's a fun read, but I don't think it's critical for our understanding of history as a historical process, so that it'll be represented in Humankind, our Humankind lore here. But here, a really important person who I just think that we should probably be talking about, so that way we can kind of like frame what is actually happening in Humankind, is Gordon Childe. So Gordon Childe, for people who are not familiar, I guess I probably could have linked his bio in the YouTube video if I were a better YouTuber, but he's a really important person when it comes to like the development of archaeology in the 20th century. But he had, of course, his own personal biases. In this case, the personal biases of where he grew up as an Australian archaeologist and like the direction of his politics. He became a committed socialist, even like a spy or at least a friend of the Soviet Union, although not like necessarily an apologist. He certainly was a defender of them. And so the personal biases of Gordon Childe, they express itself in his historiography and the way that he presents history. And the way that Childe presents and understands history is through a series of revolutions, because that does fall under sort of like the broad proto-Marxist way that he thought about the world. But of course, like, there's a reason that Marxism was like popular in certain parts of the world. It has a lot of really powerful emotional connections to the way people observe history and the way that they observe the world. And so framing things as a revolution, when humans are already framing themselves things like the Industrial Revolution and observing the dramatic changes that happened within those lifetimes, I don't think it's unreasonable that this sort of theory caught on. It also, you could frame it from the perspective of looking at it as existing in an imperialist world where you want to kind of like emphasize the people who have moved into an agricultural economy as being important historically, right? And so there's a lot of different ways that you can read Childe's work. But at the end of the day, Childe's work was really just not true. A lot of the things that he talks about like agriculture being this massive step forward for humans is kind of true, but only kind of true. And once you start digging into like what is actually happening, dialectical materialism, I will say I am a bit of a dialectical materialist myself, Bruno, so I'm not here to call them out, but I do think that it is important to remember that it is a narrative lens through which we are viewing history. It is a very particular, specific, critical lens, and you can use different lenses to interpret history, and I think different lenses operate like better in different cases. But overall, yeah, I think I understand where Victoria 3 is getting its stuff from, because I largely agree with the philosophical statement that capital creates power, at least in the modern world. It definitely does. But that, like, ultimately history isn't really about those narratives. Like, real history, good academic history, is about the stuff that they're doing here, and then historiography is still useful, I think, to the academic pursuit of history, but it isn't like what the pursuit is about. The pursuit is about that first 4x. It's about exploration. It's about discovery. It's about finding like new and interesting things that either change the way that you've taught something or thought about something, or at least help you reassess and refine the way that you've talked about something or taught or taught about something. But that's kind of what's going on here in when it comes to the way that the agricultural revolution like really works in human history. We don't really know how it really works in human history because we weren't there. But what we do have is a vast array of archaeological evidence of artifacts left behind by humans, either in the way that they've changed the environments around them or the way that the environment around them has actually changed them. And one of the most interesting things here actually is this the second paragraph here for their introduction, where they're describing something called the push model when it comes to agriculture taking control of, you know, most of human economy over the course of the last like 6,000 years. And this push model, basically the summary of this is that basically it was an adaptive niche where there was a piece of land that people needed to use, and there was not enough resources for the people who were around, because humans are biological objects, right? So they have a carrying capacity, and as the Neolithic humans hunted the mammoths to extinction and the aurochs to extinction on like little islands in Denmark or whatever, they started running out of food, and that meant that they needed to come up with new ways to support their population. And whereas, you know, some other humans might, or some other species might just die off, humans have technology, or at least the capability for technology. And so the push model isn't necessarily describing just that that agricultural is better than you know, nomadic pastoralism, or in this case something even prior to that, hunter-gathering. It's saying that agriculture just used an existing evolutionary niche, and then because of other things that happened around agriculture, like maybe they were better at doing reproduction, and that's something that gets discussed later in this document, that agriculture just outcompeted it sort of accidentally. So the 1.1, this is sort of another thing that calls back to this. So the earliest, this is I think one of the most important sentences, honestly. The earliest evidence for plant cultivation comes from the site of Abu Huraya around 13,000 BP before present, and appears to be associated with a decline in wild plants associated with the Younger Dryas. So this is reinforcing what I've heard in other things, where like sometimes humans don't arrive at agriculture because it's necessarily better, but because it's necessarily the only way they have to survive. And then you can see 13,000 BP as plant cultivation beginning. That's way before the Neolithic, and that's because, as we see throughout the remainder of this document, that the way that agriculture actually takes form in humans is pretty complicated. So here, 1.2, we can see here, this is the second paragraph. This one's important. So a study of linear enamel hypoplasia, bands of poor quality dental enamel that form during periods of childhood illness or malnutrition, has demonstrated a dramatic increase in the frequency of LEH between the late Paleolithic and Neolithic of Egypt. So what this is another thing that I've read, that Egypt actually has a really interesting nutritional outcome for the way that their humans behaved as they moved into agriculture, and it's that initially the health goes down, but then here, the next sentence they're talking about, a gradual recovery in the frequency of ELH with the formation of the Egyptian state, showing that the negative health consequences of agriculture were short-term and mediated by cultural factors over several millennia. And that kind of, if you know the form and structure of the Egyptian state, where it was trying to smooth out the problems of agriculture, that like sometimes you just have a really bad harvest, but because you also sometimes have really good harvests, population booms can occur in an agricultural society where you actually go beyond the natural carrying capacity of your labor in regards to its agricultural production. And so if you just have like a really good harvest for like 5 years in a row and people have too many children, and then you just have like a mediocre harvest, then it feels like it's a starvation event, and it really kind of is. And that's why when you see these sort of agricultural states start to emerge, especially around like rivers and stuff, you do see them tend to have a lot of physical government infrastructure concentrated on food maintenance, granaries and things like that. And so that's just like a really cool little neat thing that they've picked up on, and a really important thing that they're highlighting in regards to the Egyptian state, that as you see statecraft emerge and evolve, you'll also see that like the problems of agricultural tend to go down. I think page 1991 is where they talk about the Yayoi and Jomon transition. Don't say you cut it. You didn't cut it from here, did you? Oh my God, did they cut it? Good Lord, they might have taken away my thunderous applause here, but there was a really good section of this where they were talking about what happened when the Yayoi people came into Japan. But basically you do see in certain cases a meaningful nutritional decline and people getting smaller whenever agriculture moves into an area, but you don't always see that. And because the Yayoi show up in I guess I have a Wikipedia page open, I can just open this, because these people were coming over pretty late into Jomon Japan. They actually had like the advanced statecraft of China kind of indirectly helping them out, because the Yayoi people probably came over from Korea, and Korea at that point wasn't like so heavily in the Sinosphere, but it was definitely Sinosphere adjacent. So like the way that human history works is incredibly bizarre and complicated, and you can try to connect things, and that's what we're going to be doing when we get to playing the game. But one thing that I want to make sure that everybody knows is that you really should not be speaking purely, or at least thinking about things purely authoritatively. Human history is interpretive, and it should change to new evidence, but it should also be something where if we know something to be true, like corvée systems were really important in early human history, and even into like middle human history, and chopping down trees is really important, that like the mechanics of the game should reflect that truth, whether or not it's like explicitly spelled out in the narrative. So 1.2, we talked about the LEH bands. Oh, human domestication. This is another really cute and interesting thing that they talk about here. So human domestication, people know, if they know a little bit about history, they'll know about, you know, the way that dogs have changed as they've been domesticated. But if you know a little bit more, you'll know that corn has changed as it's been domesticated. You know, it's moved from looking like essentially an inedible grass into something that is a massive producer for a big part of human history. And other things like that, where domestication has really changed the morphological identity of the things that we're interacting with. So much so that we'll talk about this when we get to 1.3, but we've changed some of the things that we interact with, so much so that they cannot exist without us anymore. And that's really strange and interesting, but humans have kind of underwent the same sort of morphological changes, where we've looked different as a result of doing agriculture because of, you know, different forms of getting nutrition, and of course different people surviving and competing in the gene pool. But the third section here, I think this is like probably the most important paragraph, which is just talking about the way that that agriculture really works, and like the consequences of agriculture and domesticating crops. So let me drink a quick slug of coffee, and then we're gonna read this section out for you. All right. So this is sort of talking about the evolution of plants. Oh, I gotta close this door. Our AC is really loud. Our AC is just ridiculously loud here. All right, so the evolution of domestic plants from wild progenitors involves a narrowing of the period of ripening of seeds from several months to several weeks. So this is really critical for why agriculture just sort of like grew as a constant background for human history, because if you got more food faster, you could just support more people, and then you would just have a larger population, and then your culture would just kind of by default become dominant in one form or another. But you know, there are some really important nomadic pastoralists who contest that in human history as we get further down the line. But ripening seeds from several months to several weeks, presenting what has been called a labor bottleneck. So this means that also there's a consequence to this ripening process, which means that you have to harvest everything sort of all at once, right? If you plant all of your things all at once, and they're going to ripen all at once and need to be harvested all at once. You're going to lose a lot of food to spoilage if you don't have a good system for organizing and categorizing your labor. This is furthermore, as it says here, furthermore, wild grasses generally disperse seeds by the presence of an abscission scar, which is lost in the process of domestication. As a result, domesticated plants often require human activity in the form of threshing and winnowing to separate and disperse seeds. This has been called a labor trap of domestication, associated with the transition to agricultural food sources. So they don't spell it out. Oh, no, they do actually here. So while this does not necessarily mean that the agricultural subsistence is more labor intensive than other subsistence strategies in all circumstances, it suggests that the transition to agriculture is behaviorally complex and likely fueled technological innovation throughout much of the Holocene. So they do spell it out right there, that effectively what we've already talked about on one of the other VIP streams is that one of the theories behind why humans invent and interact with technology is as a replacement for labor. I think if you observe things long enough, that becomes probably true. I think you have to refer to a lot of these things as being probably true, because like we're not yet divine beings capable of assessing the true nature of reality yet, but we can say this appears to be true most of the time. And because of the way that labor bottlenecking works in regards to agriculture, you'll also see, like, for a vast majority of time, until like the invention of things like dwarf wheat, that yeah, all right, they don't have an actual page for dwarf wheat, but basically when you can invent ways for people to not have all of their food spoil because they have to harvest it all at once and then like can't actually process all of it all at once, that labor bottleneck, people survive a lot better. And as a result of the Green Revolution, people have been surviving a lot better. Whether that's good or bad is, I think, a debatable thing, but it is absolutely true that as we've changed our agricultural technologies, humans have developed as human machines a lot better. So our last little section that I want to talk about here is 1.4, the second and fifth paragraph. So this is just where they're highlighting pastoralists. So just to frame things a little better for what's going to happen in Humankind, the Neolithic period, if you're thinking about it literally, means that effectively all of the players in Humankind have kind of already progressed to the point where they're conducting at least small-scale agriculture. I don't think that's bad, right? I think that that's a fine place for people to be in the game if the goal is to get people to be building civilizations and developing cultures and things like that, a la Civilization. But that does mean that you're just not going to have people doing hunter-gathering forever in the game. Like, this is not where they are historically. And I think that pastoralists probably, if we're looking forward to Humankind 2, which there are going to be some things where I'm gonna be like, I don't know, this doesn't seem like it works in either Humankind Vanilla or VIP. Maybe some of these things will be more like Humankind 2 things, but I feel like nomadic pastoralists probably need more of them. Like, we sort of have them in the game in the forms of things like the Huns and the Bantu, but like I feel like we need more of them just to do a better job of representing why big swaths of human territory, the ones that were kind of like environmentally hostile to agriculture, were also environmentally friendly to nomadic pastoralism, to having domesticated animals who can still pass zoonotic diseases onto you. Like, that's a big problem that people don't really think about, but as soon as you start doing agriculture or concentrated nomadic pastoralism where you have, thousands of domesticated sheep or whatever for your clan, as soon as you start doing more complicated things like that and interacting with animals like that, then disease spreads from humans to animals a lot more readily, and that's another reason that could factor into like why we see some strange nutritional outcomes for people when they switch into agriculture. But then also, if you think about it, that people are like switching into agriculture in response to rough environmental conditions, maybe that's to be expected. Maybe it's also that we just have way more pops to look at in agriculture, so like we'll just have a better distribution of things to pull on, because the sample sizes that they talk about in section 2 and above, which we're not going to analyze, but I do encourage you to read. Sample size is a problem that historians, especially archaeologists, just have to deal with, where you can say here are the 28 samples that we have and what we think we can infer from them, but 28 samples is not like a perfectly representative sample of things. It's literally all we found so far. And that's, I think, another part of what makes history and its depiction in video games cool, is that you can take a historiographical approach like Paradox does, or you can take a detailed historical accuracy account, but I don't think you really feel like you should need to. I think that developers can interact with history as a narrative device however they want to, as long as what they're doing makes sense. And that's where we're going to talk about min-maxing and math in regards to VIP, so it's good that Bruno is here so you can assault us with more hostile math sections. But I think... Oh, no, wait. Maybe we didn't miss Yayoi. No, here it is. Here's the Yayoi farmers. Yeah, so here they're just talking about, in chapter 10 of this book, that because Yayoi farmers just had massive advantage over Jomon foragers, their population growth on Japan was really, really fast. Same with what ended up happening with the agricultural revolution in Greece. It does seem as though it was really quick there, but then there were other areas where as you read this and you read the other the actual analyses and the data that they've interacted with, sometimes agriculture was a lot slower to grow in certain areas, and it was a lot faster in others, and you try to describe it. Oh, yeah, it sounds good, Bruno. Yeah, you gotta leave in a few minutes. That sounds good. Are you guys doing all right? Bruno had a human child. That's crazy, man. Humans reproduce. That's kind of like the biological imperative here that they're trying to talk about in regards to the biological changes with humans in agriculture. Yeah, see, man. All right, well, I think that's probably enough talking about history. I think we can pause the YouTube and then talk about the game here. And we're going to talk about the game here because I remembered to enable mod tools this time, so we can just immediately switch into the ancient, and then we will be able to talk about sort of the changes that Bruno has brought in, the sort of a basic this is the review of what the ancient video is going to be like. Only thing is the baby is at the hospital and he can't suck enough. Yeah, that's rough. Yeah, if he's at the hospital not coming home, that's kind of a bummer, but it's the way it is. He's a preemie. Yeah, unlimited boobs, perfect. All right, so in the mod tools, which I will probably need to do a stream telling people how to set this up, because I will tell you that every time I forget how to do it, I have to message Bruno, and so that means that that little window tab that I have to remind me is not enough. See, man. I think the mod tools are just a fantastic way for us to skip around to a couple of really important periods of human history, periods where we can just talk about the systems that exist within the game, whether or not the systems kind of create that historical narrative, because I do think that that's what's important for Amplitude games to really click with me, is that they need to have a good handle on the mechanics as a representation of the narratives that they're trying to interact with, because the other games that they make are all great at that, right? Unless Legend 1 is just all winter all the time with the dust monsoon, which I should have played with more because it definitely needed it from just a tempo mechanical perspective. But the flavor and narrative of that is that it is a world that is dying, that is becoming all ice all the time. And I will say that this is something where for Humankind 2, I kind of really wish that they had a better way to represent climate change in sort of broader strokes, because as that loads, we can pop back over to Wikipedia and talk about the Little Ice Age and things like this. But this is something that does occasionally happen in human history. And then more recently right here, but this is something that does occasionally happen in human history, is that the climate on Earth changes a little bit, and that I think could be really important when it comes to creating a better narrative pace in the game. because one thing that really does bother me about Humankind is that it doesn't have sort of a mid-game crisis. This is an issue of being spoiled by modern video game conventions, but like Stellaris gives you access to a mid-game crisis and in the form of the Great Khan, and I think works really well, like just in terms of giving the players sort of a connection, a reason to come back and focus on the game, right? That there is something very important that is happening on the world right now. And I get that people don't like the fact that like the Yellow River, the Huanghe, has moved so many times over the course of Chinese history. Are they going to show me the different, they're historical courses of the Han River and the Yellow River? Like, for people who know the way that river agriculture works, when your river moves, it's a huge problem for people because they live where they can make food in a subsistence world when it comes to human history. And so having little events like that, I know that it would make people really mad from a competitive standpoint. So I think you'd have to figure out a way to balance it where like there's a lot of extra resources so that you can manage those catastrophes. But I feel like those catastrophes are kind of what defines early statecraft. If we end up getting, I don't know, maybe like 10 likes on this video, we might do another video like this talking about like the Bronze Age collapse or something like that. But yeah, in Civ 3, best impact climate change. Yeah, here, it's the thing is, Lulu, is that I don't want it to be a problem if you're prepared for it, because it shouldn't be something where it's the only thing that matters, you know. And like I remember that nuclear apocalypse Civ file that was just like absolutely insane. It was Civ 2, right? The one where it was 3 nations locked in permanent apocalypse blowing up the world. But like, you can do climate change prior to that, like Civ 3 and Humankind and Civ 4, and like all of them do lean pretty heavy into the anthropological sources of climate change, and I think that's good. I think that is important for like a late game crisis, but I'm talking about like early and mid game environmental crises where like crazy weird stuff is happening to humans that their current systems cannot absorb or understand, and so people have to do dramatic things in response to that, because that's kind of like how I think cultures and stuff should work in Humankind. That they should be, I should have asked Bruno, how do I open mod tools? Lulu, do you remember how to open mod tools, or do I have to Google this? I can move the display capture. Nah, I'm probably gonna open Wikipedia like 15 more times. All right, how do I open mod tools so I can do stuff? Because we're gonna pop around and like check in on different AI and talk about like what they're doing and how they're behaving more than playing, because we're trying to assess Humankind basically as a historiographical tool, because that's kind of like where I think that all of them end up settling, even if they're trying to avoid what Paradox does, which is like apply a very particular specific lens. If you're making a video game about history, you're writing about history. Like, this is historiography, like very definitely. It's just that it isn't always employing things in the same way. All right, so how do we open this? Shift F1, is that right? Shift F1, there it is. Bam. All right, sweet. So for those of you who are interested in doing debug mode stuff at home, I guess I'll do this sort of informally here, and then we'll do it formally in a different video. But just like with Age of Wonders 4, where you have to go into your launch options, you have to go into your launch options for Humankind and do -- allow mod tools, all one word. Once you've done that, then when you're in the game, Shift F1 will open up the mod tools. The mod tools I am not a master of. I wouldn't even consider myself, honestly, like a competent user of. I would consider myself someone who Bruno has shown this to a couple of times, and I intend to practice more with it. And that's sort of like where I think about these so far, but there are some really important things in it when it comes to just being able to do really rapid observations in Humankind, so that we can talk about the systems, because that's what we want to do here. So I'm just gonna do an auto turn I guess we'll just do like 5 turns, just like let the AI do stuff, and then we'll just switch over to one of the other empires, and then we'll start talking about the mechanics of Humankind and the way that those mechanics sort of inform the game's understanding of history. All right, so our first outpost can be built. So this is something that by skipping through to the ancient rather than staying in the Neolithic as at the beginning, we skipped the period where we can do outposts. But that's sort of like where, or like doing outposts while we're doing hunter gathering. That's sort of where I think the game is telling you that this is a Neolithic period. Like your people are capable of doing settled agriculture. Wait, why is it still going? Stop. Stop auto-turn. Go away. Why are you still auto-turning me? Whatever. We'll switch over to this other AI. Where are you? Where are you, AI? Here you are. So the systems of Humankind, I think biggest problem for me, like right off the bat, you haven't even researched masonry yet. All right, whatever. I guess we will give them a couple more turns so we can talk about masonry. But one of the biggest problems I have with Humankind is just the way that the early game economy works. The early game economy in most of human history is non-economized. So what I mean is that if you think about Victoria 3, they're your subsistence farmers, your peasants. They don't actually like make goods that you can tax. They mostly make goods that they consume themselves. That is subsistence. That's how most of human history has worked, honestly, through most of the time. And that's why when you look at like a GDP per capita chart, it's a little misleading because like a lot of subsistence things are intentionally not counted towards GDP. So be aware that the metrics that humans use to assess their own, I wanna give them the word progress here, but only barely. The tools that they use to assess their own progress are pretty clumsy and definitely like framed by the person making the observation. But that said, like GDP per capita isn't a pointless tool to measure ourselves. It is a complicated one. But when it comes to early game construction in Humankind, there are a lot of traps in vanilla, like just things that I think are not good because they hurt the player for clicking on them. And the issue here is sort of threefold whenever it comes to those sort of buttons. So here, the reason that it's going to be so difficult for me to want to play more, wait, why don't we have masonry? Did masonry not give us the whip? No, it did give us the whip. Why can't we whip, Bruno? Where did you go? All right, whatever. Maybe it'll be available next turn. But whipping in core-based systems are something that I really feel like we need to have a conversation about, because the math here, I think, just like really hurts with the way the game plays. Why is it not here? Why can't we whip? Why can't we whip? Yeah, standard of living is like sort of more important, but it's also one of those things that's like, how do you actually measure standard of living? Because the best way to improve SOL in Vicky 3 is like build stuff. Why? I'm gonna have to ask Bruno what the hell is happening here, because normally there's the like buy rush whip button right here, and it's missing, and that is a really critical early game tool, I think, for most economies in most historical 4Xs. The reason being that if you think about, we'll pretend it's here, and I'll have to ask him after the fact what's going on. But basically, when it comes to early game construction, I think it should mirror the way that early game or early human construction works, which is by leveraging core-based systems in chopping. So a core-based system is a system wherein the state extracts unpaid labor from its citizens. I don't know why people always think that means slaves. It doesn't always mean slaves. It does very frequently mean slaves in regards to the ancient world, but it doesn't always mean slaves. And very importantly, core-based systems were not exclusively maintained through slave states. Like even into the 18th century in France, it is unlockable through, it's supposed to be unlockable through masonry, but it wasn't unlocking for us on that other culture through masonry. So I don't know why maybe it was just that culture. Maybe it'll unlock here. Are you gonna let us build some stuff? All right, there it is. So I don't know why it wasn't letting us whip on the other one, but it's here, so that's good enough. The math is, I think, the most important thing when it comes to this button, and the reason being is just like the way that the game is going to work. If in any 4X you've designed a tool that is a noob trap, something where the math behind it is just hostile to anyone clicking on it, then not only is that going to be a skill test for an average player, it's going to be something where they're going to get punished by play, by interacting with the tools that you as a designer have given them. It's also going to harm the AI's behavior, like just by having any noob traps anywhere in the entire game, which isn't to suggest that like balance is the only thing that matters, but I think people vastly underestimate how important game balance is when it comes to non-competitive play. Non-competitive play, if you want to encourage people to play Humankind, to enjoy the game, then I think the best way to do it is the way that Bruno's done it here, where like he's actually significantly increased the amount of production that you get out of each whip because of the way that he's readjusted the math. So he's changed the math of this by just costing, like in the olden days in vanilla, you only get this as your multiplier for how much production you get. It's like, I think it's this times your speed plus a little bit or something like that. It's a very, very, very small amount of industry that you actually get out of whipping in vanilla. And this means that the basic way that humans built enormous things, which was by leveraging, forced labor, either slaves or captive citizens or war captives. That was something that would show up in China a lot. Regardless of how they acquired that free labor in order to build things, it's not really present in vanilla, because you really cannot afford to be clicking like some of these enormous exorbitant costs. And I think that even this is still a little bit high on this one, but this is just like a city with 1,000 districts already, so that's probably why it's so expensive. But broadly speaking, understand that this buyout with population, it's not just representing you like literally working people to death, but it's also representing the nature of unpaid labor. If you have people who are doing unpaid labor, they're going to starve to death in the pre-modern era. Like that's like the way things work. If they cannot afford to feed themselves because the state isn't paying them, but they have to work all the time, they can't do the other things that they need in order to not starve to death, so then they starve to death. But the consequence of making that button bad in vanilla is really more complicated than just it's a noob trap. It's also something that influences the relative importance of the different resources in a 4X in a way that I think really hurts the game's understanding of human history, because everything that I know about human history tells me that like food is really important for early game humans. Like you want to get to basically your maximum carrying capacity as quickly as you can, just accidentally, just the way that humans work as biological objects. And so I feel like by rushing with pops bad, they're making the verisimilitude of the game worse, and they're also making it just more hostile to people who are actually attempting to roleplay, which... Let's have a brief conversation about role-playing too, because this is just a really unstructured nonsense stream. This is our April Fool's Day stream. I think role-playing, if you take a step back and you say, how would an ancient person behave, that's very different from how a modern person would behave, and that isn't to serve as a form of apologia for slavery, but it is to simply serve as a representation that if you are role-playing as the ancient Karlans, you're gonna think very differently about the consequences of clicking this than if you are a modern person. You're also gonna think really differently about the consequences of clicking this than you are as a modern person. And it's because yes, we do have the modern lens to view things through and like know the long-term consequences of cutting down these forests, but you also have to remember that we are thinking about that through the world where our ancestors have already done all of this, right? Like, I didn't link any of the other books that I think are really important, but there are some other really great books on things like deforestation in the ancient Mediterranean. The long and short of it is that humans have been great at deforestation for a really long time. They've been great at hunting things to extinction for a really long time. And even in like to the prehistorical period, we still see humans having environmental impacts or ecological impacts, like even prior to written history. So like, I want to see more of that. I want to see more of humans doing things that A, make mechanical sense, and B, make narrative sense. And having chops be good and having whips be good, that's important, I think, when it comes to just communicating what human history is about. And then of course, like later on, that's where like the civics come in and adjust things around, where no longer is it responsible or even moral for us to be sacrificing pops with wherever the civ is that closes that matters a lot more whenever whipping is good. So that's another one of those like little mechanical changes that you can make in order to change the way that the game talks about human history. Another really important thing that I think Bruno does better in the VIP mod than is happening in Villa is the way religion works. I still kind of feel like I could use a little more of from abstain, but I would overall say that the way that Bruno handles religion here works a lot better as a narrative device within human history because of the way that humans have largely used religion, as far as we can see. Yeah, production is always king. Yeah, well, so the thing is that Lulu, production is one of the most important. If you think about 4X's, then there are a lot of like mostly true heuristics. Like science is almost always really important. Production is almost always really important. In Humankind's defense, food is almost always not very important and is usually something that you have to try to like minimize in regards to your game. That's not always true, and that's one of the reasons why I love Civilization 4 so much, is that food is super good there because you have the tools to transform food into different things. That's another reason why I want this to be better, is just so that food is better, because food is connected directly to this, and if you can get it to the point where like if farmers were making, 600 food per turn, then you would never put anybody over here. You would just click this all the time to build stuff, which I don't think really makes sense either. But I think that food should be good for early game humans to pursue, because food was pretty good for humans to early pursue in real life. So that's like just a rebalancing thing where we'll see how humankind develops. But I think that largely the way that things are balanced here makes sense. But I think largely the way that things are balanced here also makes sense, because this is a way for humans to essentially change their, like, fine-tune their cultures to the environment that they're living on. So something that we didn't talk about, like, in massive depth on this, but if you read this, you'll see it does show up, is that a lot of things are dependent to your local terrain and local environment and local conditions, and that is sort of the way that religion works in VIP. It's a lot less that you only want to get abstain and then move on. That's the way it works in vanilla. This one is really that much better than everything else, and it kind of breaks the game's balance. If you get this, you're way ahead of everyone, and so you want to get religion in vanilla, so you get this. But that's like kind of what you're doing with religion in vanilla, and that's kind of it. And it kind of makes the religion a lot less interesting. The way that Bruno has done it is that you can take these little competitive traits, which you do still want to compete over, because some of them are going to be a lot better for you, and not just like what your build is doing, but what your world is doing to your build. Because I do think that that's where the game really should exist, is not people like spreadsheeting things without the context of, oh, I have access to rivers, but rather spreadsheeting things with the knowledge of, oh, I have access to rivers. And that's where like religions and different cultures, I think, can do a really great job of just communicating the way that history works. Is that like very frequently civilizations and cultures would emerge either in response to, you know, maybe there was a catastrophe like the Bronze Age collapse, but maybe it was just that they're in a new environment and they just need new social and cultural tools to interact with their new environment and survive it and thrive in it. And that's kind of like how I feel about culture swapping. So I don't know how to frame this within the form of our Let's Play, but like this is just sort of a conversation. I really think that the culture swapping in Humankind is necessary for a game like this, like either Humankind or Civilization, to be a little more historical. Like, it doesn't bother me that much that you play as the Americans in like 4000 BC in Civilization 4, but I would be lying if I said it doesn't bother me at all. It does bother me, and it's because humans did not maintain that kind of continuity. Like, there is continuity, there's absolutely continuity, and history, the more that you look and read at things, like, the more you'll realize that continuity is like one of the defining traits, but stasis is not, and that's what you see when it comes to Civilization, like without the culture swapping system. So like, I know people hate it, and or at least some people hate it, and like contribute Civilization 7's failures and problems to the fact that they have culture swapping, but I really hope that that game does well, so that I can come back to it in 2 years and cover it when it's good, because I think culture swapping is critical for like critical technology for representing the way that human history works, and I think that anyone who wants to make a historical 4X should proudly include that sort of thing. And because of the way that they work here in Humankind, it's not even like these are just like straight up way better than the earlier cultures. Some of them definitely are a lot better than others, but they're all meant sort of to represent a fitness to a specific location, a specific occurrence of things, right? Like if you have a bunch of money producing already, then maybe Oxamites is going to move up on your draft selection. I don't know about like our conversation that we've already had about in regards to the draft, like how much better the good things should be than the worse. I think broadly they should all be playable. If you have unplayable things, then that's like not good. That's again more punished for play, like noob traps, things that are going to harm more casual players as well as the AI. But anything that you can do to make these more marginal guys like understandable, at least for me, is good. So we're gonna have to utilize Bruno if we can't find time to play some games with Komodo because he's too busy playing Civ VII. We're gonna have to ask him what he's been doing with things like this, because like I've complained about the nerf to a steet, but like I do honestly think Pama is still playable. I have some problems with the rest of what's going on with the steet, but similarly, agriculture, the agrarian guys are like outside of the Harappans, mostly nonsense in vanilla. But that's also sort of like another really interesting tension that Bruno's introduced into the game here. In its defense, having one or two options that outshine most others are really good motivation to develop strategies to rush religion. Yeah, no, you're right, Lulu. Like, so Lulu's point here is that when abstain from intoxicants is a lot better than the other ones, then there is a competitive rush to get to the first tier 1 religion like immediately, and I think that is kind of a good thing in a sense. It's sort of what we're talking about in regards to culture swapping, Lulu. That I think you should have a mechanical reason to want to click through to the next era. You should have a narrative reason to click through to the next era, and that those things should be aligned as much as possible in order to make a good historical game. And having a competitive mechanical object that people need to get to is a reason for them to get religion. But I don't think the only reason that people should be interested in getting religion. Like, religion does kind of just happen a lot in human history, and you can't just ignore it and say, well, all of the humans wanted ways to extract the most production out of their woodlands. Humans mostly did not behave that way. Religions emerged all over the place, and a lot of the religions have like cosmogony and understanding of the universe sort of like built into them as an object of the religions. So I think having religions that specifically reference terrain at the beginning of the game makes a lot of sense, or like specifically referencing specific behaviors makes a lot of sense, because it gives you ways for you to develop your religion in ways that respond to the game. And I think that that's like better overall. I'm one patch behind of updated VIP. I think I'm on 5.4. I think I'm on 5.4, Bruno. If I'm not, then that explains why it hasn't updated with the last patch. All right, well, maybe that's why I was still able to load the ancient era save file, but it's okay. Like we'll get probably that video done tomorrow or Friday. And then I might do a medieval, but like, honest to God, Bruno, your math is so much better that it really does make playing vanilla a chore. So I think we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna like do some VIPs, just like streaming of Humankind, and then maybe we'll have to do some tier lists or something, because like Uber does seem to have vanilla kind of down. He knows what he's doing over there, and I can't not want to play Humankind where food is good. I think that that's important, and the fact that we haven't gotten to our unemployment power cell super build yet it means that there's like a big discovery process here for me. And that's sort of like what I think a good historical 4X should be doing, is creating a great opportunity for people to do discovery similar to like the normal 4X, explore. People should be doing discovery, and like I honestly, man, like I just struggle a lot with trying to discover things in the late game in vanilla Humankind, because either you died when you tried to do a swords rush on like turn 30, or you didn't, and then like all the other turns kind of like don't matter, because the AI is just like off doing its own thing, getting 10,000 fame, and like not interacting with the fact that going from one culture to another is not only good for describing like the non-static nature of human history, it's good mechanically because you get more bonuses that you get to stack together, and because of the way that Humankind works, the more bonuses that you stack together, the faster you'll grow. I wish I'd pinned this in my little notes, but there's a really great line in here where they're just effectively describing snowballing patterns in human population growth, and the way that like alloparenting and things like that influenced here it is. There we go. Yeah. All right. When they're talking about the niche colonization section. So when this is combined with food surpluses, it results in reduced interbirth intervals, increased birth stacking associated with alloparenting, and increased fertility. It has long been speculated whether demographic shifts amongst hunter-gatherer societies stimulated this cultural change because greater numbers could not be sustained on the basis of hunter-gatherer subsistence. And recently it's been argued that consensus falls on this push model. That's what we're talking about there. So that basically, because agricultural societies allowed for simply higher reproductive advantages earlier on, that they snowballed a much larger population. And you can just think about that pretty easily within the tools of a 4X, right? If your pops have 4 children that survive to adulthood rather than 3, you're just gonna grow your population like infinity faster over the course of 3 generations than the people who are growing at 3 or like worse 2.5 or something like that. Yeah, the game ends once you monopolize a new world. That's fine too. So Lulu, that's sort of like, I guess we can just like go back to the main menu and load in with like the industrial or whatever. But yeah, there are a couple of like big period changes where sort of like the same way that we were talking about in regards to the agricultural revolution, I don't think it's appropriate to overemphasize concepts like the Industrial Revolution, because there are always, asterisks to this was a really big and meaningful change for humans. But it was a really big and meaningful change for humans, right? Like, agriculture, despite all of the things that we're talking about here, was a huge impact for humans in terms of their human history, and the Industrial Revolution is similar. And I would say that that's like another one of those things where in a Humankind 2 kind of scenario, I want my rivers to change course. I want a volcano to erupt. I just want it to be where, like, I have good periods too to balance it out, just like in Endless Legend, where we had dust monsoons or the dust eclipse or whatever it was, and then they had the really bad the actual winters in Origa, and part of the game was balancing that pendulum between high and low. I think if you include catastrophes like the Little Ice Age, as long as you also include long warming periods, then that's fine. Why didn't this let me click through the industrial era? I'm gonna have to do like a secret stream with Bruno sometime where he explains to me how to use these little checkmark things, because clearly I don't understand what I'm doing. Clearly I have never used modtools before. But what were we talking about? Oh, the Industrial Revolution, right? If you accept that, there are limits to how you measure in like GDP and like problems therein, you can probably also accept that, just looking at a graph of GDP per capita for humans is kind of meaningless. But only kind of meaningless because it won't let me. Maybe I just can't play on industrial without ending the game immediately. All right, well, whatever. We'll just talk about it here in regards to the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, by creating urban spaces that kind of outcompete rural spaces, really changed the way that humans work. I don't know how they're supposed to be handling that in game, because one thing that I did talk about with I actually went to Sulla's Discord and talked to some of his fans there about Humankind. And one thing that they mentioned was that, like, the late game just kind of becomes district spamming. And I don't even think that's necessarily a bad thing, because that could be representative of the Industrial Revolution. But the problem, if that is the way the Industrial Revolution is supposed to be represented in Humankind, is that you just, like, start vomiting tons and tons and tons of districts, is that you can kind of start doing that a lot earlier than the Industrial Revolution. So it means that, like, the revolution is not there. It's like it's like swept under the rug for some reason, and I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem up there with, like, not representing catastrophes or including a catastrophe I'd love to see. I would love to see plagues. I would love to see that if you have multiple continents and one continent comes into contact with another continent, that you have a Columbian exchange, which could include, disease, because that's a really important thing when it comes to humans. I don't know if you have to include, like, the Black Death. I think that could be neat in terms of including in a Humankind 2 or something like that. But I think that, like, the stresses of statecraft should not just be between states, but should also be between, like, states and the environment, because that is a really important part of the human development, but also just, like, a really important part of 4X's, right? Explore, expand, exploit, exterminate. If the expansion and the exploitation or the exploitation period, like, don't have good feedback because the systems aren't, like, designed either mathematically or just narratively to have reasons for you to pay attention, then, like, the late game kind of just flies off the rails for me. So I guess that's a good enough point for me to pause the stream, because I think we kind of, like, previewed what we're gonna have to talk about in the vanilla improvement project video. But, like, the math just does not produce behaviors for me that make sense. And I think that's really easily fixable, and I think that's great news for Humankind. And I really hope that VIP actually, honest to God, just, like, moves over as much stuff to Humankind as possible, because, like, modded content is very challenging for me to want to commit time to, because I think it can be inherently disruptive, and, like, split communities. I don't think that's always true. Like, I love After the End, and I love the fact that it's like a total conversion mod that tells an entirely different story, but like, I have reservations about wanting to make a tier list for VIP, but I do also think that it's just a better game. And I think that if we can like create enough content for it, hopefully you guys agree with me and with Potato and with Bruno and with so many other people who've played on VIP and enjoyed it, because it really just it checks the box of being a historical 4X for me a lot better than Humankind does. Lulu says, Civ 7 tried to do it, but was bad. Yeah, DLC will make it relevant, surely. I hope that Civ 7 is better in 2 years, Lulu. I really do. But you know, it's the way it is with Firaxis. Like, I'm sure that they released it earlier than their developers wanted to and later than their business people wanted to, and that was sort of like the worst compromise position that they could come up with, was release Civ 7 now and it'll make everybody mad. So yeah, that's kind of like why I think it's important to get some of this math changed over now, just so that way like the most accessible form of Humankind, which is vanilla, is closer to VIP, because I just, it really does clean stuff up in terms of communication. But you know, we can be a part of that communication ourselves. We don't have to like spend 3 weeks going to help my parents to clean out an apartment for like 1 full weekend and then just play Baldur's Gate 3 all the way through. So yeah, we can get some more content done and figure things out and talk about why this isn't updated for me. But I'll see you guys in the near to immediate future. All right, it's Walker. Take care.